Welcome to Conversations with Asha and Steve, where communication matters. Join us as we discuss effective ways to communicate, bridge the gaps, and build long-lasting relationships within your business and life. Here are your hosts, Asha Prasad and Steve Harper.
Hey, what's going on, Asha? How are you doing?
Hey, Steve. How's it going?
I am doing fantastic. Welcome to another Friday. Yeah.
I can't believe we're in June. Like, what has happened? We're in the 6th month of the year.
I know. It's crazy, right?
It is.
This year is actually flying by in a good way, for sure.
It is. No, it's true.
So,
I agree.
yeah, I'm trying to get situated here because I did a new camera setup since I last talked to you. And so it's a little weird as to where to point my eyes.
I think
Plus
it
watch the board.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we
different?
should start that intro again. Welcome to Conversations with Asha and Steve. I am your host, Steve Harper, and with me, as always, is my co-host, the beautiful and amazing Dr. Asha Prasad. What are we talking about today?
You know what? We forget about these things. I don't know. I forget about these things. You always remember, but I always forget. I just kind of jump into the conversation, just like, okay, let's talk.
Well, that's the way we should do it, really. At the end of the day, that's how's it been over there? Are things getting better with the pandemic? You know, I haven't actually talked to you live.
Things are starting to slowly open up. This weekend we have another kind of phase. They have these phases of opening up, so we're going to the next phase, so that's good. I mean, can you believe it's kind of weird, though, if you think about it. Whenever I tell people that we're still in some sort of lockdown here, people are like, what? The rest of the world is, like, open and doing whatever their thing, and here we are, just like, okay, yeah, we'll just open this up now. Now we have this.
Slowly but surely.
We're getting there.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, as long as you're getting there, that's all that matters, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the important thing.
Well, so kind of excited to talk about today's topic because we, when I proposed it, you're like, what are you talking about? Right?
Well, okay, so Steve, tell people what our topic is and then explain people what we're talking about, because my mind went directly to something else. So just
okay.
Go for it.
Tell me where your mind went first, then I'll introduce the topic.
I was thinking like legacy. You know, I was thinking about legacy, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah. But then, so I'm glad I asked the question.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could certainly go there. What was on my mind was, and this came up from a recent conversation that I had with a client of mine, that they were looking at a pretty significant change in their business. Mm-hmm. And the question of, well, what's the end game? What's the end game you have in mind? What are you playing for? And so when I proposed it to you, thinking about this, you know, you think about all the big things that we go through in life, right? You know, whether we're, we're going to write a book like you are right now, or we're talking about launching a podcast show like we have, or, you know, you've got a business and you're maybe going to acquire something to add to that business, or at some point you want to exit that business. You know, what's the end game that you have in mind? What's the game plan that you have for that? Because I think a lot of that is, you know, you get excited and enthusiastic about an idea in the moment, and, you know, you start to put effort and action towards whatever that might be. But a lot of times we don't often stop to think, what is the end goal here, right? You know, what is our end game, right? And it was pretty interesting because this particular client of mine hadn't actually contemplated that. And we were talking specifically about, you know, so there was some pretty strategic things that needed to take place and occur for this to make sense for their business. And, but they weren't actually thinking through all the steps that at the end would get them, you know, sort of, you know, what that would look like when they got there, and what it would do in terms of their valuation, what it would do to their management structure. And it actually gave them sort of an opportunity to kind of take a pause and go like, hey, in the enthusiasm of the moment, you know, this sounded like a really good idea, but now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now I'm adding this company. Now I got their management team I got to deal with. Now I'm going to potentially have to add a board seat. And there were all these things that started to come up. And it's like, okay, so what's the purpose of why this idea got you enthused in the first place? And so that's the in-game concept that I thought we would just talk about today.
Yeah. I think it's great. Yes, Steve, knows it makes sense, whether it's legacy or whether it's a project. But you know what? I do think it's important. I mean, I think it is important to think about, like, what is it that you're wanting to achieve with whatever it is, whatever you're taking on. Because I think whenever you look at that, now, here's one thing, though, I have seen with some of the clients that I've worked with. The problem that can arise is rigidity. And what I mean by that is that they are so focused on, this is the way it needs to go, that's what I set out to do, and that's how I'm going to do it, that they don't see, they don't remain somewhat flexible to other ways of doing things. I don't know if you've seen that with your clients. I've seen it with a few of my clients that has kept them kind of in a holding pattern for a while.
I feel like you're talking directly to me.
I am looking at you, but I'm not talking directly to you, Steve. No, but you know what I
started
mean,
to sweat a little bit, like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. That is actually me. Whoa, wait a second. Hold on.
But you know what? It's hard, right? Sometimes.
It is. Yeah. You get so committed, you go all in, and you're so focused on that. Sometimes you're not willing to bend or change to adapt.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
I guess, the scenario that kind of brought this up to the forefront in the first place was the fact that this situation was potentially a very viable opportunity for this particular individual's business. But as they started to kind of, look at the different components of it and started to think through what actually that meant, the way they like running their business, the approach that they take for their board meetings, the board that they have currently, they love. And now you're entering into this new phase where you're going to have to incorporate other people that you don't really know that well. And they're coming along because that's what happens when you do an acquisition of some sort. And now these people are going to have a say. So, how tied to this process are you? Because, that will change. The dynamic will change. And they had not thought through that process. And I think from a rigidity perspective, like you just raised, they're very, very structured in the way that they do it. And now you're kind of really introducing a upset to that balance to a certain degree. So that was an opportunity for them to kind of take a step back and look at, whoa, is that what I want? Is that what I need?
Yeah.
Is that kind of, the approach that makes the most sense? And, there's no there's no resolution necessarily with this particular client situation just yet. However, it was a good opportunity for them to start to explore what does that look like, right, at the end. And that's what, the whole endgame component that I was talking about, I kind of meant. And I'm looking at my notes that I sent you yesterday just because I was like, hey, when you said, what does it mean? Like you start something like a business book goal with an endgame in mind. Why or why not? Is it important? Is it necessary? Does it help? And it, will it keep you locked in and less susceptible to adjustment along the way, which is what you're talking about with the rigidity.
Right.
So that piece is kind of, I think all those things, when you look at, sort of the end game in mind, I think that's some really interesting things we could look to explore.
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve, because I just went through this myself, just with the process of writing the book. So originally, the book that I set out to write is not the book that is going to be released in a few months. It's a totally different book. It's really, and here's the thing about it.
Is it a pop-up book now?
Yeah, it's going to be a pop-up. It's going to be very interactive. It's going to be so cool.
I will be able to read this one. Awesome. That's my kind of book.
You can. Oh, that would be so cool. No, Mark would probably kill me about the layout. But anyway.
Yeah, he would. Yeah, he would.
So, no, but the thing it was very interesting because there was, so the concept was there. I was, already writing, already getting the ideas down. And then in the middle of that, the pandemic hit. And I was still going down that path. And that book will eventually get released, the first one that I started writing, okay? But somewhere along the way, because of what was going on with the pandemic, things started to change for me as the author. Things started to really change. And there was something else rising up in me that I wanted to get out. I wanted to share with people.
Interesting.
And so it was very interesting because in speaking with my editor, Mark Schwartz, which who is your editor as well. Anyway, we had an open conversation about it. It was just like, what, because we ended up kind of running I wouldn't say that we're kind of like hitting up against a wall, but there was something that wasn't flowing. And I believe that, when things are meant to be, things will just flow. It's amazing how things just flow. Doesn't mean that it's not challenging, doesn't mean that it's not hard, but things will flow. And we were kind of hitting that wall, and we're like, okay, wait a second. There is something else emerging here that we are ignoring because we're so, persistent, determined to get this book out. No, this is the book that needs to get written. So I had to like start over from scratch in a way of like, okay, let's redirect ourselves. And what's interesting with that is that as we did that, things started flowing in such a just really easy way. It's very, very, very interesting. And you have to trust that, if I wasn't flexible with it, Steve, that would have been really like really, really hard work, so to speak. It is not easy to write a book, but you know what I mean? It's like you're fighting up against something. Why do it that way? Go with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's, I think to your point about the rigidity of where you think it needs to be, sometimes life or circumstances change to the point that it will kind of guide you a different direction.
Oh, it'll smack you upside the head.
Doesn't mean that you don't get, that first concept, that first idea. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to go back to that, right? In fact, you're probably going to go back to it, and it'll be the right time to actually work on that direction. But the fact that you were open to and flexible enough for things to evolve in the way that they have, this ends up being a better product in the end than what you might have been trying to force out on the other concept or the other book, right? So I think that's pretty interesting. Do you think that, because I know for myself, sometimes I do get too tied to that endgame goal, right? Or whatever my objective is, that I sometimes fail to recognize those feelings as they bubble up that, hey, wait, maybe this isn't the right strategy or the right direction. How did you come to that realization? How did you stop yourself to start to say, well, that's interesting. This is kind of coming to the surface, and this might be fun to play with or fun to explore. How did you arrive at that moment? And then how scary was it to make that strategy change, right? That strategic direction change when you did do it?
You know what, Steve? It's very interesting because I have to say I have had a lot of experience of beating my head up against walls. You can probably see the mark here. No, I'm just kidding. No, I literally have had so much experience of like that. I have learned now there are certain things that, like I was saying, when things start to get sticky, like stick in the mud, basically really hard, that I'm having to put so much effort towards something. I have learned that for me is a time to step back and reevaluate, even if it takes longer. And this has been something I've had to learn, is the patience factor of, it's not happening quick enough. Well, maybe there's a reason why it's not happening quick enough. There's got to be a reason. And so in that process, I'm very attuned to listening to what is going on and seeing how, for example, if, you're in the book writing process, if you're sitting down and you're wanting to get some thoughts, whether it's with writing or recording or whatever, and nothing's coming out and you feel like it's chore. For me, that's a telltale sign. It's a big red flag to say, Asha, something is not okay here. You need to step back. And it's hard sometimes because sometimes I'll still want to push it through. But it's just about that, Steve. You got to get to know yourself in that way. You got to get to know what it is, what it feels like when you're in the flow and what it feels like when you're not. Does that make sense?
It
when
does.
You're just pushing through, just really, I'm going to make this happen. That for me is like, if those words come out of my mouth, I'm going to make this happen, then I know I'm pretty much barking up the wrong tree.
Because you're having to force it, right? You're having to push it.
I'm having to force it. Exactly.
What happens if everything ends up being a chore, like it does for me?
Yeah. So pretty much just take a vacation. Just check out for a while.
That's what I say. I want to do that all the time, but nobody agrees with me. I don't understand.
Yeah, that's the other problem, is trying to get people around you to agree with that. They may not think that.
I guess we have to go back to one of those earlier episodes where we said, well, don't listen to everybody, right? Just don't pay attention to them.
Exactly. Just go back and listen to that and just say, oh, yeah, I don't have to listen to you. I'm going on vacation.
Yeah. Well, when this topic comes up about the end game, I think that, one of the key factors is you may start off with a presumption of where you want to go or what that end result might be. But I think at the end of the day, you have to recognize and be open to and attuned to being flexible to whatever that might be. So it's okay to have the big objective, right? You know, we want to go from this destination to the next, and we want to get there, you know, through these types of vehicles or this types of approach. But you have to be flexible enough when life throws a curveball at you or something doesn't feel right? And to be, cognizant of that change in your motivation or your inspiration, or, if things do feel like you're pushing the boulder up the hill instead of, things naturally flowing, those are important things to pay attention to and to stop and take notice of.
They are. You know what, Steve? I think getting into the practice, and I know that you do this as well, getting into the practice of visualizing and just imagining like what it is that you're wanting to accomplish, where you're headed towards, and then allowing yourself to kind of get into that creative space, and you can see the steps, get really clear on the steps. It's not that you can't get clear on them, but in that process, as you're taking a step, be aware of all the things that are being shown to you too, because there may be something to your left or right that says, hey, you know what? This is actually a shortcut. Because otherwise we can get so focused on that, we'll take the long way to get there.
Well, so, how important is the end game then in the grand scheme of things? Do you advise your clients or the folks that you work with to have that some sort of finish line set for themselves, whether it's losing weight, reaching a certain, commitment level on their health or mental fitness, or, if they are planning on, writing, a book or starting a business, how critical is that for you to think through what that might be in those early stages, what it might end up being, or is it not so important in your opinion?
You know what, Steve, it's a very good question. On one hand, I will say, it's important to know where you're headed, but I like to advise people, and when I work with my clients, of like, okay, really I want to drill down, why is it that you're wanting that? And more, 9 times out of 10, it's because we want to feel a certain way. Yeah. It's because we want to contribute in a certain way. And I think when you drill down to that, the end game, so to speak, it doesn't become the end all be all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you're more willing to be into the moments actually that are leading up to, it's like the journey, basically enjoying the journey rather than the end, than the destination. It's one of those things. So yes, I do think it's important because you need to know where you're going to. It's not just about, haphazardly doing this and doing a little bit of that. But
like I'm doing in my entire life. Okay, good to know. Yep. All right.
I'm doing it too. As long as you're having fun doing it, Steve. No,
Not
but
always.
You know what I mean, though. But it's one of those things that I just think, yes, it's good to know where you're going, but evaluating why is it? What is it that you're really, really, really wanting? Like, get honest, with yourself of what it is that you're really, really wanting to do.
Well, it's kind of funny because as the situation that raised this question in the first place, as my client and I started talking about this, the interesting questions that started to come out of that why, right? That factor, and you've said it before on previous episodes. The why is a really important motivator. It's the fuel that sort of ignites where you're headed anyway. But as we were talking through this process, the goal behind this individual was, well, we want to grow, we want to expand. And this particular company has a customer base that could add value and bring additional revenue and opportunities for us to expand our larger brand. And so from on the surface, that looks really good. And it makes a lot of sense. But you keep asking the question. I have a good friend, Drew Bixby, who is he and I have co-founded a startup before, and he's a top dog at a technology company now, and he's very analytical. He's a CPA by trade, which is amazing. He can talk to anybody because he would rather be in the numbers or the data and the stats. But he's incredibly gifted. But he puts us through this process, and he and I just recently talked about this as it pertained to my software company. new feature questions, right? And you have to be asking questions constantly about why. Yeah. Why is that? Why, and the whys help you to deliver the whats and ultimately the outcome. And so this whole mental shift and process really kind of came into play with my conversation with my client, because when we really got and boiled it down to what they were looking to do, this individual wants to grow their business to the point that they can sell it, right? And this is so the end game was a larger end game for them is an acquisition in the next 3 to 5 years by doubling their size. That theoretically got them closer to that sort of target revenue rate that they needed to be at, plus incorporating new technology, which on the surface all sounds good. But the big pause for them was, I hadn't quite thought through the process of, okay, now bringing these folks in, there's new headcount that I have to account for. There's new, seats at the executive table, conference boardroom conversations are going to be different because there's a different dynamic. They've run their business a particular way and been successful. We run ours a little bit differently and have been successful. So there's this merging of cultures that are going to have to come together, and ultimately who makes decisions, when there's conflict. And we just kept asking the why question. So why do we want to do this? Why do, if this happens, what will be our outcome? And, started, really sort of peeling that onion back a little bit. And although there's no decisions that have been made, I think, and if I had to put money on it, I would guess that they are probably not going to do it, because the differences in culture and management philosophy are so significantly different that it might be hard to overcome. And, does it get them closer to that end game? Potentially. But are they going to be happy when they get there? I guess is probably key.
And you know what? Also, Steve, it's like, are they going to be happy when they get there? Are they going to be happy generally through the process? And what's it worth to them?
Yep.
Is it worth that end game? Is it worth going through all of that, maybe upset, challenges, and friction? And if it is, in some cases, it is. And people are like, well, I know that that's what I have to do. The end game is worth it for me. That's what I want, and that's what I'm going to do. But it's interesting when you start drilling down and asking these questions, what exactly, what you decide to do. Basically.
Yeah. Well, it didn't work out so well for some of the Marvel superheroes in their end game.
No, it did not. That is for sure. They didn't ask enough questions.
They didn't. Yeah. Specifically Iron Man. That guy got screwed.
Yes. Yeah. He really.
Well, so, I kind of find this as a pretty fascinating and interesting topic, because I think it is important in one hand to, like we said, obviously you're trying to have a approach where you have some sort of finish line, right? Some sort of goal in mind at the end. But you have to be flexible enough to know that where you think it is today or what it might look like today could be vastly different tomorrow or 3 years from now.
Exactly. I mean, Steve, how has that played out for you? How has that played out for you in your businesses, or even with projects, even with your book, for example? How has that played out for you?
Nothing has gone as I expected it to, which I think in for a control freak like myself, that's really hard to admit. At the end of the day, the path that I have gone down on several of these ventures have all materialized way differently than I expected. And it's kind of, they always, there's that joke that says, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I mean, that's pretty much the case for me. But you do, to a certain degree, if you're going to start a journey of any meaning, you have to have some sort of destination in mind, and you have to want to try and figure something out. For me, in my book, when I originally brought out the first edition, I thought I'd sell a couple hundred copies, and my dad would buy the rest of the inventory, and that would be it, right? Oh, I wrote a book, woohoo! And that took me down so many different paths, opened up so many doors and avenues for me that I never anticipated or expected. All I wanted to do was get these thoughts out on paper and maybe have somebody, someday brag that they had a copy of my book that was printed way back, a long time ago. And it was a legacy thing for me, right? Hey, you're in the Library of Congress. You have your name, listed somewhere that will be there forever, right? Which is kind of a cool thing to have. But I never looked beyond that. And so when the book started opening up other avenues or training and coaching and obviously professional speaking, that was never expected, and not sure if that had been on the menu when I was writing it, I may have gone forward, because those things at the very beginning of my, writing stage would have been very scary and overwhelming to me. So to a certain degree, not seeing all the cards that are going to be played is very helpful. For my businesses, those things have always I've put a lot of trust and faith in that I show up, I do a good job, I work hard, I take care of my customers and my clients on everything from every business that I've ever been involved in. That good things tend to, to always come about because of that. Sometimes we don't know exactly what that is. My software company is a perfect example. When I acquired it, the majority interest of that business from one of the original founders, I thought it might be just a lifestyle business. Never really expected it to, really grow where it has. And now we're one of the foremost competitors in the space. We're not awesome. Huge, and at some point maybe we'll get there. But at the end of the day, we're well thought of, and we have this reputation for not being a software company, but being a customer service company that really happens to have a software component to it. But you look back, and if I had started at day one thinking that that's where we are today would have been where our end game was, I would have been so far off, right? I think in so many ways, and so I think that flexibility, not being so tied to what you think the goal might be, what your end game might be, I think is pretty critical, especially for entrepreneurs, right? You have to be flexible. You have to be fluid. Too. What about you? Let me turn the table on you. How has that, how has this affected your businesses? Because you've gone off on a couple of different directions. I mean, you were practicing here in the U.S. You left the country. I mean, you weren't even legally obligated to leave the country. They didn't kick you out or anything. You just chose, like, on a map, oh, let me go practice here. Oh, they have a different language? Oh, I guess I need to figure that out too before I can do that. But then you've turned into this dynamic, entrepreneur in so many different ways. And, I bet you didn't start off in chiropractic school thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to be this dynamo entrepreneur. You just wanted to get the license and practice, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know what, Steve, it's interesting because I have always envisioned myself doing many different things. Always. As a child, I was 5 different things. I was like, I was going to be, and we talked about that, I think, in one of our episodes. And it's one of those things that, in fact, yes, it was like some of the big steps. For example, whenever I wanted to move to Europe, mainly I wanted to move to Europe. I love to travel, and I love Europe. I love traveling in Europe. Of course, this pandemic the last year and a half has not helped that at all, but I've done my fair share of traveling, and I really wanted to do that, and I knew that I was ready for the next challenge. For myself personally, professionally as well, but more personally. And so but because I've been able to stay flexible to a certain degree in my mindset, which has not always been easy. I tell you, it's very easy to kind of get into the day in and day out routine, but I have learned to keep that flexibility. It keeps me going. It's like I'm not afraid to step up for the next challenge. I mean, it's one of those things that just, and so in doing that and stepping into the next unknown, that has taught me to be able to just be flexible. And I really hope to, do many more things. Going to space is one of them, that, but
Freak.
I'm sorry, I have to put that out there, but it is. It just is. One of these days. No, but you know what I mean? It's like, but not being afraid to limit yourself or to stop dreaming about what it is that you want to do and what you want to experience. I think, and that in that way, it's helped me be flexible in my businesses. I mean, because, yes, I'm an owner of, chiropractic practices. I practice, I see my patients. I love that. But I'm also, an author, do podcasts, do coaching, mentoring. I mean, it's, and sometimes people look at that and go, did I just see that you have a podcast? Wait a minute. And you're on 2 podcasts. You're a chiropractor, though. I'm like, well, that's just another hat. You know what I mean? This is the way I look at it. It's like, because I don't, those labels. I'm like, what are those labels? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's how it's really impacted that. Just being able to not be afraid to kind of stand. I don't want to say stand out, but not to think like everybody else. And I think that's what as entrepreneurs, we don't think like everybody else. Yep. And that's what makes us successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. And, I think as an entrepreneur, you place a lot of bets, right? You place
yes,
those bets mostly on yourself, but you're placing it on a couple of different business avenues, a couple of different directions, where I see some entrepreneurs really struggle is they put all of their efforts into that one thing, and they're so committed to that end game of, oh my God, I come up with the greatest software or technology, and somebody's going to come in and write this big, huge check for me, and I'm going to be able to retire to the Virgin Islands and live the rest of my days. And then, you realize that just, those stories happen, but sometimes they just don't happen for everybody. Right. And
exactly.
And if you are going to make it happen, there's going to be a lot of twists and turns to that adventure in order for that to happen. And so one of the things that I've always kind of admired about you, and I've tried to emulate for myself, is that we take a lot of chances on a couple of different things at given times, right? Yeah. We're constantly writing, we're talking about podcasts, we're doing, coaching, we're working in a couple of, different areas, because we're not exactly sure what any of those end games will lead to for us, right? Exactly. And that's kind of the adventure for it. We know we want to do something, but if we had started this podcast and said, well, okay, what is our end game? What's the goal here? Right. And, how do we judge whether we're successful or not?
Right.
We may have been disappointed in season 1, right? And we might not have continued to talk because the expectations were so falsely placed, right? So I think to a certain degree on the big things, you do have to kind of know where you want to go, the destination, but the end game does have that sense of finality to it. And I think that, you have to look at it from hey, if things go great, what does that end game look like? If things go bad, what does that end game look like? Yeah. And then what if things just go? What does that potential end game look like for you? Yeah. And have that flexibility. And so from our perspective as entrepreneurs, to have a couple of things, a couple of bets on the table where we can say, look, we've got a couple of things, a couple of irons in the fire that we're still committed to. One, it keeps us fresh and forward thinking as entrepreneurs, but it also keeps us really committed to continuing to play and to try and do new things. Yes. And that part, I think, really is what intrigues me about being an entrepreneur. And you are right. I mean, people look at you, not you per se, but will look at me and be like, oh my God, how do you do all that stuff? And, is that like, do you have attention deficit issues, or, are you just not, you have a focus problem? It's like, no, I don't have a focus problem. I manage my time better than I bet you do in a lot of respects. Yeah. So don't judge me for what I do. But I happen to dabble in a number of things that really intrigue me. And that's what gets me out of bed every morning.
Exactly. That keeps you motivated. And you know what, Steve, it is interesting because I get comments a lot with people, or they're just like, how do you do all these things? And, oh, you must have so much more time. And I'm like, everybody has the same 24 hours. It's what you set your mind that you want to do. How do you want, I want to be able to look, 40, 50 years from now. I want to be able to sit there and go, you know what? I did everything that I wanted to do.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I tried it. Even if I failed, did not matter. And I think a lot of times people think of, whenever they're doing their job, for example, that's exactly what it is. It's a job. It's not their life.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's like you have to meet life with your passion. Why not? Life goes by so quickly. Why not bring your passion and, what it is that you love to do? That gets you up in the morning. Absolutely. That keeps you motivated. Yep. And that fills your time with such meaningful work.
Yep. So I agree. Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I didn't know what our end game was going to be for this conversation.
Me either. Apparently, Steve, I had to get clarification for you.
Yeah. Well, I liked it. We should go back to that. I think when you were like, well, you mean at the end of your end, right? But you did get there. I mean, you were like, hey, look, at the end of the day, in 40, 50, 60, 70 years, you know, you want to look back and go, hey, look at all the things that I did. And I'm proud of what worked and I learned from what didn't. And, you know, it's all about, life is about experiences, right? And it's about doing those things in a way that you can be proud of. And so, you know, I think that you and I both have built careers as entrepreneurs that we can definitely be proud and happy about. And even though the end games may be a little bit murky about what, you know, these different ventures might lead us to, that's okay, right? Having that faith and that confidence that it's going to work out in the end, and that, you know, the twists and turns, the adventures that we're going to take along the way as entrepreneurs is sort of the value of the whole thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's so true.
Well, so Asha, tell folks how they can learn more about the show. For those of you that are listening on the podcast, we certainly appreciate you doing this. We have a YouTube channel, and, you know, certainly welcome you to check us out when we post these live streams. They go live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. But, you know, we also have archives of our past shows that you can see. But how do people find that, Asha, and how do people learn about you and what you're up to?
So you can definitely find us at conversationswithashaandsteve.com or contact us on any social media, Facebook, Instagram, Conversations with Asha and Steve. For what I'm doing in the world, you can go to theprasadmethod.com and find me at Dr. Asha Prasad or at the Prasad Method. So, and Steve, what about you?
My website is ripplecentral.com, and you can find me on almost every social platform at RippleOn. You know, we'd love to hear from you. So definitely, you know, reach out to us via the website at Conversations with Asha and Steve and our Facebook page. Great place for you to let us know what you're thinking of the live stream, the topics that we're covering. If there's a topic you want us to cover, you know, the whole purpose of these conversations are to stimulate more conversations, to have you to, you know, take these back to your families, your friends, your teams, your work environments, and you know, see what, you know, additional conversations that we can inspire you to have. But we would love to hear what topics are burning on your mind and what you'd like us to cover in the future. And that's how we keep the show fresh and exciting for you. And that's, I guess, part of our end game. It's part
of our end game.
That's part of our end game. We just realized what it was. All right. Awesome.
Yeah, see?
All right. Well, listen, we appreciate you tuning in to Conversations with Asha and Steve. We will be back again very soon with another episode, another live stream. We're on the road next week, so we will be we will be posting an episode in our place, but we do appreciate you guys tuning in and listening. And as always, you guys have a great day. And Asha, thanks for the time. Great conversation.
Thank you, Steve. Have a good weekend to everybody. Thank you.
Take care.